Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers Podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the World Wanderers Podcast. We are so grateful that you've decided to join us for today's episode of the show. Today on the podcast, we are very excited to be joined by Debbie Arcangeles. She is a remote entrepreneur as well as the host of the Offbeat Life Podcast. If that podcast sounds familiar to you, it might be because Ryan and I have actually been guests on the show. So in the show notes for this episode, we'll make sure there's links for our episode on her podcast. And her podcast is all about where she interviews individuals who are location independent and digital nomads. And that is a lot of what we talked about on this episode of the podcast.
Yeah, in the episode, we talked to Debbie about her experience as an entrepreneur and as someone who's lived location independently. We talk about her travel experiences, and then we focused in on her experience growing a business that exists online that she can do from wherever. And so we thought this would be a great episode to put out, kind of given the current times where there's more uncertainty about travel plans and where you might be looking at ways to take on new opportunities that you can do from home. And if you want to learn more about digital nomad, location independent work, we've been doing a series on our World Wanderers Insider podcast. You can get access to that when you join our community on Patreon. It's just $5 a month, and you'll have access to a number of interviews all about digital nomads, people who are working online from home right now or wherever they may be. And so if you want to check that out, go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers. All right, now here's the episode with Debbie.
Debbie, welcome to the podcast today. We're super excited to have you here with us.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited too.
Yeah, thank you for being on. And so we wanted to start off today, like we do with almost all of our episodes, with asking where in the world you're joining us from.
I am currently in New York City.
Okay, cool. And do you call New York home?
Yeah, I actually grew up here, so it's home to me.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I know we've both been there a few times, and it's crazy, chaotic, but a fun place for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because if a lot of people that I know, a lot of friends who have moved here, it's probably like between a 5 or a 10-year thing for them. And then if you don't have family here, it's hard to kind of stay in the grind all the time. It can be really overwhelming for sure.
100%. Yeah, I could definitely see that. And so, Debbie, how did you first kind of start having experiences with travel, and what kind of was your spark that made travel something important to you?
So travel was not something in my family that was for leisure for the most part, because I come from an immigrant family. I'm also an immigrant. Traveling for us was a way to have a better life. So the first time I ever traveled was when I was about 8 or 9 years old to come here to the United States. And that was to move to New York to have a better life. So that was my first experience of actual traveling. And I didn't really get the bug until I was about 16 years old. And, you know, in the United States, people, especially, well, girls specifically, have sweet 16s. And my dad was a merchant marine, and he used to travel a lot for work. Again, it wasn't for leisure. And I was always interested in everything that he was bringing back from all of these different countries from all over the world. So instead of having a sweet 16, I told my parents I'd rather go to France instead of just doing like a one night of something big and a lot of money, to doing it for like a week and spending it with my school and friends. And that's really where it started, and I couldn't stop after.
That's amazing. I love that. I would definitely have preferred like a trip to France for my we don't really do sweet 16s in Canada. It's definitely different, but I definitely would have preferred something like that also. So I really appreciate that. And I'm curious because I feel like, you know, travel for immigration, I feel like it's totally different than travel for leisure, as I'm sure that you can attest to, having experienced that firsthand. What was it kind of like experiencing this trip to France? Like how was it different compared to this first time when you traveled you're from the Philippines, right? Originally?
Yes.
Yeah, from the Philippines to the United States.
Well, traveling for immigration is a totally different thing because you're pretty much being uprooted, especially if you're young. Everything you know, I mean, as an adult too, obviously there's more responsibilities for you, but it's completely different, obviously, because you're being uprooted to a different country. It's not like you're going there to have fun and find yourself, and this is a choice that you had to make because you think it's like really fun. No, for the most part immigration for me and for my family was, if we don't do this, we're not going to have any money, or we're going to starve or things like that. So it was really something that we had to do to make our lives better. Now, going to France obviously was completely different. It was just to explore, to see and eat things, and it wasn't stressful. It wasn't a stressful moment. I wasn't crying the entire time when I was leaving because I was leaving a lot of family and friends behind. So it's definitely a complete opposite of both ends.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense for sure. And so after you got back from France, what was your like next travels that you wanted to do?
So after I got back from France, obviously my parents are immigrants and that was like a huge splurge for them. And so I knew that I wanted to keep traveling. So after I came back, I started working when I was like, I don't know, 13 at my aunt's like she had this friend that had a company and I started working for her. It's obviously not legal, but I was always taught at a really young age to earn my own um, money. So I knew I wanted to travel, and obviously I couldn't ask my parents for money. So I was working at that time. So I just started saving as much as I could. And I saved for a few years. And when I turned 18, I started to do traveling on my own. I was reading a lot of books about Scotland, and I really wanted to go there in England. So that was the next step that I did. Was I went to Europe. I went back to Europe, and then I did a few weeks there with my fiance. Now we've been, as you know, we've been together for a really long time. So he's been there since this all started.
Amazing. And so from that point, you were just kind of like, I've got the travel bug and I got to keep doing this thing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, throughout my whole 20s, I was just traveling a lot. And then even when I was in school, like like a lot of people, you know, if you're interested in it, that's all you can think about. And I was for me, I thought I was really fortunate because I actually discovered photography from that. And when I was in college, I ended up majoring in art and photography, and it led me to be a photojournalist. And that also allowed me to travel to all different types of places as well. So it really gave me a lot of different things than just traveling for the sake of travel. It gave me a lot of what I wanted to do with my life, a sense of direction as well.
And what was that experience like working and traveling as a photojournalist?
It's a totally different thing. I feel like there's so many misconceptions when you're traveling and working at the same time that it's all glamorous. At that time, there really was no Instagram, so you didn't have that IG worthy type thing. So for me as a photojournalist, I was going to countries that were not IG places. You know, I was going to mountains in Sinai in Egypt. I was working with NGOs in Central America and Latin America. So it wasn't as glamorous. It definitely wasn't glamorous, but it was definitely eye-opening for me, and it made me even more aware of what was happening in the world, and it made me really appreciate everything from my own journey as an immigrant to what I have in the United States, and then to also see the other parts of the world and how they also lived.
Yeah. And I know for us, from coming from like non-immigrant backgrounds, sometimes you interact with family members and friends who just don't get it in terms of like wanting to travel so much. What was it like, kind of your interactions, and kind of what were your family's thoughts when you started to travel more and more and more? Were they like, what are you doing? Like, we worked so hard to get you here. Or what was that experience like?
I definitely had that pushback from my family, because it was, as I had mentioned before, traveling for us, for immigrants, is not something for leisure. It's a way to make your life better. So I definitely had that from my parents. For that Sweet 16, I cried so much just to tell them, like, I don't want this. I don't want a night of like a big party. I want to really experience the world. And then after that, I just kind of started doing it myself. And because I was earning all of the money and I wasn't asking for help and I wasn't asking them to pay for it, they really had no choice at that point, because it's not like I was taking anything from them. So they did give me pushback, but because they saw how much work I was doing in order to do this, they, in some ways, they did respect that. And I was still going to school and I was still working, and it was just an added thing that I was putting on. So obviously, yes, there was pushback to it, but they had to accept it. And it was really funny because in my family, I have a big family, as most Filipinos are. And I was pretty much really the first one out of my whole family to do this. And I think it was really great for my cousins and for other members of my family to see me do this. And then they also started traveling and they got the bug also. And now all of my cousins are traveling and also world travelers. So I think that's a really, great segue for that as well.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And I think it's really cool that you've been able to inspire, other people in your family, because I think it is so powerful once you've traveled to other cultures to have those experiences. But I do, I can relate to, getting pushback from my family, maybe in a different capacity or maybe for different reasons. But this whole like, oh, you've done some travel, like it's time to have like a big kid life now, like an adult life. And that's not what adults do. Adults don't run around the world. And I was like, well, maybe they do. Let's see and find out. And then to, be self-sufficient in a way that like, it's like, you can't really control what I do anymore. And I mean, we don't have kids, so it's so tough. But I feel like as parents, you're always trying to make like the best decision for your kids and like send them in the direction that you think is best. And I mean, our parents lived in a totally different world than us. So it kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's inspiring to hear that you continue doing that despite the pressure you got from your family.
Honestly, I think if people who are listening to this are getting pushbacks like that, I always say, if it's really something that you believe in, and if it's something that you feel like you have to do for yourself, just do it, even if you are getting that pushback. Because I did, like, for years, pretty much throughout my 20s, that's what I was getting. But because I stuck to my guns, honestly, looking back, everything that I did was because it was my choice and not anyone else's. And I think if you look back at everything that you're doing, even if you make a ton of mistakes, it was your mistakes to make. And obviously take advice that makes sense to you. But, if you want to do this, as long as you're doing it for yourself, you're making the money, you're not asking them for money. I feel like if you're asking for money, that's a totally different thing. Because if you really want it, you're going to figure out ways to do it. So just do you. And I think you'll be a lot happier if you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely love that piece of advice. Something I'm curious about is, how did you discover photojournalism?
So when I was in college, film photography was still a big thing. I actually know how to develop my own film, print it by hand with all the chemicals. And my photography professor at that time was this incredible photographer, and he really taught us, the value of photography and where it came from. And then I started really getting into um, portrait photography and photojournalism. And obviously, because I was interested in a lot of different cultures from my own background, that's how it started. And obviously, with my love for travel, I kind of combined both. And I was working in galleries in New York City. And then it just really culminated in all of that. So for a few years, I was doing that. I was traveling to different countries. And then my last show was in China with the UN. And that was kind of like my huge goal, was to work with the UN and to travel with them. And then after that, it just ended for me, because it felt like it was a great ending to that journey for me as well.
Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing achievement. I feel like doing that must have just been so amazing to reach that goal. So congratulations on that. As people who work in travel, I feel like we can definitely relate to the fact that travel is definitely different while you're working, but we've never worked in like the photography side of things, unless you count our Instagram feeds, which you probably shouldn't, because we're certainly not photographers. I'm curious, like what was the experience of like living in New York City and then taking these trips to go do these like photojournalism projects like? Like, where did you go? What was your day-to-day life doing that? Like, how were your travels while you were doing those types of projects? That sort of thing.
My travels now compared to my travels when I was a photojournalist was, again, there's so many yin yangs with my life right now. I was definitely a backpacker. Everything was on the cheap. Obviously, when you work with NGOs, you're either working for like nothing or very minimal. So you were really on a budget, on a complete budget. And it was a lot of struggles. It was a lot of really getting used to all of the different cultures, the people that you're working with, the different companies. So I mean, it's a big difference from now, like what you see with the IG community, and obviously with how I travel now and the companies I work with. Now it's more luxury, and it's a total difference to that. But it was a really great experience, all the struggles that you have. I think when you're younger, it kind of allows you to really appreciate everything that you're going through. And I think the more you work for it and all of that stuff, it just makes every experience better. And now I have so many things to look back at, pictures that I've taken, people that I've met, I still talk to this day because of those experiences. So I think the harder I think I felt like it was, now looking back at it, and I think the experience was a lot better for me, especially. But I feel like as you grow older too, your travel experiences are so different from before.
And so when you made that decision that after that last big show that you wanted to kind of step away from photojournalism, what were you thinking was kind of the next thing on your journey?
Honestly, at that point, I was really burnt out because I was traveling quite frequently and I couldn't take it anymore. And I really had to step back from photography. And after that last show, I didn't touch my camera for about 2 years or so. And at that time, when I was doing photojournalism, I was still doing film photography. So aside from traveling, it was also a lot of work to do all of that darkroom stuff as well. So after that, I completely changed course from photography to travel to like, okay, maybe right now I need to find big girl jobs. So I went back to school to get my master's, and then went to get my degree in education. And I worked with kids after that for almost 7 years. Doing therapy for children with autism. So I think at that time I kind of wanted a break and I wanted something completely different. And I think we all hear this, you need to get a real life, as people tell you, you need to grow up. And I think that was my moment when I thought I wanted to do that. But the entire time I knew that I wasn't at the place that I wanted to be. And that's why I also left that, and now I'm doing something that is definitely where I need to be.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that, because it's a conversation that we've had, between the two of us, and then also with, other nomad friends that we have. Like, sometimes travel can be really exhausting. And I say that from, the side of knowing that like it's such a privilege to be able to travel the world, and we're so grateful for all of our experiences. But sometimes you just crave like sleeping in a bed that's like quote unquote yours, and having an apartment where you can like settle in longer than a couple of days or a week or maybe a month or something like that. I know we've definitely had moments of like, maybe we should just go back home and like get a house and get like real jobs and that sort of thing. But it's kind of maybe like the grass is always greener on the other side type thing. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's finding the balance of what you want that really makes you happy and also making that so that it's sustainable. I think if you can find a balance of both things, you're on the right path.
Yeah. Yeah. Two key words from there. I feel like balance and sustainable, which are so, so hard to achieve when you're traveling and when you're traveling and working. I feel like, especially when you're traveling, you can easily get caught up in, oh, there's always more places to go. And the more you travel, the more you discover that you want to go to. So the list keeps getting longer. And then it's the balance of like, settling down, finding routine, being a little bit more grounded, because I think that that's like a pretty human thing. Like I think as humans, we really like to be a little bit grounded. So yeah, those are definitely two important things that I think we're still figuring out.
And so, Debbie, I know a couple years ago you decided to start the Offbeat Life podcast, which we had the pleasure of being interviewed on. So I'm curious kind of how, I know a lot of the focus there is digital nomad stuff. It's not entirely, only about people who are working and traveling, but also about like lots of different entrepreneurial activities. But what made you kind of think like, hey, this is the area that I want to focus in on and, focus on telling stories about?
So as I had mentioned before, I left traveling and being a photojournalist. Sorry, you're probably going to hear some background noise since I'm in New York of sirens.
It's all good.
I'm like, sorry about that.
Part of the experience.
Right? So I had mentioned before that I was really burnt out from traveling. I was really burnt out from photography. So I needed a real life now. I needed a big girl job, as people say, or a big boy job, whatever. But throughout the whole time, I felt really unfulfilled because I knew I needed to be not necessarily traveling constantly, but I needed something more creative. And I wanted a balance to be able to work from anywhere and also be able to have a job that I can just literally be, just be location independent and really enjoy it and be creative again. So when I was traveling, and I still travel during my time when I was a therapist, I met so many people who are remote workers, digital nomads, remote entrepreneurs, and I was extremely interested in what they were doing with their lives. And I was thinking, and I kept thinking, I need to do something like that. I need to do that. That's really what I want to do. I want to be my own boss. I want to work remotely. I want to be an independent. That's what I wanted to do. So at that time, I really wasn't looking into doing a podcast. I didn't really know a lot about it, but my fiance was listening to so many podcasts and he introduced me to a few of them. And then I just had that aha moment where I said, well, this is a really great platform because now I can actually get advice from people, interview them, and this is content that I'm creating and I can be creative again. And then during that time, I was slowly growing my Instagram account and I had, I believe, 8 to 1,000 followers at that time. And they kept asking me for new content outside of Instagram. But I really didn't want to do a travel blog because that's not what I was interested in. So that's really how the podcast started, was just essentially for me to be able to get information that I felt like I needed to really do something else with my life and also hopefully help people who are feeling the same way, because I thought, well, if I feel like this, I'm sure a ton of other people are feeling the same way. And that's how it started. And then about a year or a year and a half later, I was able to completely leave my day job and do it full time.
That's awesome. I think we can definitely relate to like just the whole journey and how kind of fun it is and all the challenges that come along with it. But it's really cool. And so I was just looking through and seeing, you've got 100 and I think you were almost at like 140 episodes or something like that. So that's so much conversation, so much learning from so many people. So I'm kind of wondering, like talking to so many different people from so many different areas who are probably doing so many different things, what are kind of some of the biggest lessons that stick out?
I think the biggest lessons, it sounds super cliche and it's very redundant, but it's just being really persistent with everything and also not fearing fear. I think it's said a lot, but I think once you actually get over that hump of letting go of your fears, your mental blocks, and being persistent with everything, because you both know this, like there's so many roadblocks that are placed in front of us that if you give up the first try, the second try, even the 10th try, and I have to say this, I've started and failed 3 other businesses before this one worked out. There's just so many things that's going to come your way that's not always a positive thing, but if you look at it as a learning experience, it just gives it a completely new meaning. And I think pretty much every single person that I've spoken to have experienced a lot of obstacles or they've overcome something that made them stronger. So I think that's really one of the main lessons that I've learned from myself and also from so many other people, over 100 people that I've interviewed, was that it was just, they were extremely persistent. They knew how to pivot. They took advice when it was right for them, and they just kept going.
Yeah, that's amazing and super inspiring to hear. I'm curious if there are people listening who are maybe in the situation that you were in before you started your first business and they're like scared of having a business fail. Like, what are some of like the biggest things that I guess the biggest takeaways or biggest learnings from having 3 businesses that didn't work out before you found what the niche that will work out for you was? That wasn't very good English.
So there's definitely a ton of things I learned, and I think that comes from a lot of failures, which I love. I love, um, you know, being able to take that and really learning from it. So that's definitely one lesson: is don't look at all of these failures as something that's wasting your time or your energy. It's actually a learning experience for you. And I think life is such a great way to learn. It's the best school to have, is because it doesn't really care who you are. It's going to keep giving you all of these obstacles. And so for me, when I first started, as I said to you, I'm a creative person. I love doing creative things. And I went from one thing to the next where I just wanted to do creative stuff, or another business, I just wanted to make money. And I think if you find a balance, again, it's that balance, right? And sustainability. If you find a balance between the things that you love and something that you can make money from, you're on the right path, right? Because if you're just doing everything creative and you're not looking at it to make income from it, then it's just a glorified hobby. You're just going to keep having this hobby. And one of the things that I hate hearing from people is, I don't do this for money. I just do what I love. That's great. I think everything that we really start, if it's our passion, is something that we love. But don't tell me that you're not doing this for money. Otherwise, like, how do you eat? How do you live? And I think I had that mentality where, if I do this for the money, or if I admit that I'm not only doing this because I love it, but also because I want to earn income from it, there's kind of like that taboo thing, that you're not allowed to say that. And I think that was a huge mistake for me. And once I changed that mindset, things started to really work. And I think it's just accepting, money is not the issue. It's actually a great thing, because then with that, you can help so many people from it. And it's not evil. It's actually not the money that's evil. It's the person that's using it, right? So it's what you do with it and what you do with yourself, how you use it. That's really important. So yeah, changing your mindset, making things sustainable, having a balance of everything is really what I learned from all of my experiences, from all my failures.
Yeah, at the end of the day, getting money just means that someone values the thing you're giving them more than they value the money giving you. So it's kind of just a representation of like, hey, you're doing good things for people in most circumstances, unless you're, getting it from certain means that we don't need to dive into on the podcast. But for the most part, it's a good thing. It represents the value you're creating for society, which is beautiful. I think a lot of people do feel like a certain amount of like fear around things because there's certain things in our lives that give us a lot of pleasure, they give us joy, that maybe give us escape. And if you're in that job that you don't love and you love taking photography, part of what photography is to you is like an escape, and it's a place where you find contentment that maybe isn't there in some of your other jobs. And there's like a fear of like, oh, if I bring a work side into that, then it's going to like sap the joy away.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, if you just want it to be a hobby, there's no reason to make money, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're listening to this and you hate your day job and you want to do something that you love, honestly, I was just thinking about this the other day when I was going through all of my checklist, and I was talking to my fiance about this, and I said, everything that's on my checklist is everything that I enjoy. And it really doesn't have to sap anything, right? I think I made a ton of mistakes in the beginning and I didn't know how to balance everything. And that's why it took away from that. So now I'm doing photography, I'm doing interviews, I'm doing all of these things, but it's just making sure, again, that you're making it sustainable for yourself. And if you find that, then it doesn't take away from anything. If anything, it adds to your lifestyle. And it's a really great feeling to have.
Yeah. And if you eliminate that thing that you don't like, that is taking up so much of your time, you're not going to need that escape as much anyway. So it's like, yeah, it might not be the same feeling of like an escape from your day job, but if you don't have that day job, you probably don't feel like you need an escape as much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, when you're trying to escape something, it's important to understand that it doesn't go away, whatever you're trying to escape from, right? Obviously, you have to deal with that. And another thing that I also wanted to touch up on, going back, is when people actually don't want to make money in the beginning and they say they don't do certain things for money, that's also really bad, because then people take advantage of you and you just start doing services for free. So so you don't want to do that either.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with yoga teachers in the yoga space, and I feel like this is something that I'm continuously, with like one-on-one clients and stuff like that, it's like a lesson that I feel like I'm continuously encouraging time and time again. So I'm definitely a big fan of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we underestimate ourselves. And again, all of that stuff comes from fear, right? Fear of money, fear of taking away from whatever it is. It's a lot of fears.
And so, Debbie, you touched on, for the people out there who maybe are inspired and interested in the idea of like doing something else. Maybe they have a day job that they like but don't love, but would love to have something that gave them more location independence, that was more in line with their interests and their hobbies. And so like obviously having courage, not being afraid to fail, kind of embracing all the negatives that could come out of it is a big part of it. But kind of for people who are out there who maybe work in a profession that they feel doesn't translate well to doing it online or doing it as a freelancer, how can you kind of start to think about like some of the ways you could do this if there aren't any that seem glaringly obvious to you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody has some sort of skills that can be remote. I mean, even if you don't have any quote unquote real experience right now, I'm sure you do. You know how to write, right? You know how to create emails. You know how to post things on social media. All of those things are transferable to anything remote. Anything that you can pretty much do on a computer can be transferable to remote work. So if you do data entry, if you do research, I feel like that's a no-brainer thing. If you know how to speak English, you can teach it online. There's just so many things that's available there that you may not have thought of. And if you're working somewhere right now that you can't take remote, look at the skills that you're actually doing and see if those skills will transfer over and not necessarily the job.
For sure. Yeah. 100%. I think the fact that like, if you have a job, and you're like doing good and creating value in that job in person, there's probably lots of things you can do remote. Like that's basically the only signal you need. And so you touched on a few there with like English teaching. I think another one that comes to my mind is, and that we've talked to people about, is just going on Upwork and like looking through. And on a place like Upwork, there's lots of job postings for things that, end up getting done by people who are willing to charge less for the labor. But that's such a good indication of some of the opportunities that could be out there, whether it's SEO or writing or, data entry, all sorts of things. Just looking through there is kind of a list of people yelling like, hey, this is a way for you to do this remotely.
Yeah, there's so many different things now. And I think it's just going to keep getting more and more opportunities for us, for everybody. And if you have the patience and the drive to do this, and again, if you're persistent, you're going to land a job somewhere that's remote.
And so we talked a bit about kind of how you had that life phase full of adventure with photojournalism, traveling, roughing it, and then bounced back to, being more in one location, working as a therapist in that role, doing that therapy role. And now moving into a role where you're, finding that balance, finding more creative work that also gave you a lot of freedom. What does kind of day-to-day life look like now in terms of how you incorporate travel into living?
So right now, obviously, I'm in New York City, so I'm one place. And whenever I travel, it's usually for work now. So it's not the same anymore. A few years ago, it was mostly me and it was for leisure. And now it's really what my clients want me to do. They send me someplace to do X, Y, and Z. So I love having a place to stay. Because honestly, if I was just traveling a whole bunch, I won't be able to concentrate. So, for example, when I'm traveling for my clients, I have to do content creation. So I'm not sitting on my laptop the whole entire time because obviously they want me to explore. They take me places. I have to do photography. I have to do interviews. I have to write. I have to do all of these things. And I'm really taking all of that in. So when I come back, I can actually do the nitty gritty work, right? So for me, it's just not sustainable to be constantly traveling. So when I'm not in New York, I'm actually down south in Florida. I try to fly down there like a bird. When it's cold here, I try to go over there. So for me, being sustainable is just a day-to-day for me. Is a lot of it is doing emails with my clients, making sure content is going out, making sure that my assistants are doing what they need to do, giving them new tasks, and really overseeing everything and creating new processes and systems for me to market the projects that I have, or finding new clients, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's really what my day-to-day is. And as I said, when I travel, it's mostly for work, and then I come back and then do the rest of that at home.
Since you work so much and travel, do you budget some time in every year for like a leisure trip, or a trip that's like just about you wanting to go somewhere and exploring, or kind of how do you find that balance between the work and travel and then like the adventure travel side of things?
Yeah. So last November was actually the first time in I don't know how long that I actually took an actual vacation, and it wasn't a full-on vacation because I had some shoots there for some clients. But right now, to tell you the honest truth, I'm kind of burnt out from traveling, and everything is starting to look the same. I think it's just where I am at the moment, where it's like we talked about this, if you love photography, you're afraid that it's just going to be work. So now travel for me is kind of like in that sense. So which is really ironic because I wanted to be location independent in the beginning because I wanted to travel so much. But now that I have that opportunity and I actually get paid to do it, it's become work. But it's not something that I hate. It's just something that different, right? Because now I don't travel for myself. I travel for a company and a brand. So I do take at least, one trip, maybe two, just for myself, to be able to gain that love back and not work during that time. But I try to go someplace where I've been before, because if it's someplace that's brand new, then I can't help myself doing some sort of content there, or, trying to infuse the current brand collaborations that I have to that new location that I'm at. So it's balancing that, right?
I love that. It's amazing because you're clearly so passionate about what you do. So it's like you go to a new place and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to like create content on this. But then I totally understand the fact that that really takes away from like the vacation side of things. And again, kind of like we talked about before, it's really about striking balance, which is super, super hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be really tough. And some of my closest friends are in this business. And I think you both know that it's hard for other people who are not in our same business to really understand what it's like. So it's hard to talk to them about like the day-to-day stuff that we go to. And the friends that I have who are in this industry are the same way. They can't not work because if you love what you do every single day, you can't stop yourself. And sometimes I just have to. Like I actually schedule when I have to not work because I just love it so much.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely understand that. And I think too, you've touched on a lot of really great stuff around like the burnout and the exhaustion of travel. And I think that it's definitely something we can relate to. Like it almost feels like a little bit taboo to talk about something like that because, being able to travel and explore and being location independent is something that, even 10 years ago was really, really hard to achieve unless you were like a coder type thing. And so I think that, a lot of people don't understand, or they think like, oh, you're just like, so privileged and you don't like appreciate the things you have. But I think that, part of being human is like, we do get tired and we do get exhausted, and it is hard to appreciate a church when you've seen like 30 other churches that look the same, or like it's hard to appreciate the like 50th temple that you've seen that kind of looks like the other ones. And yet it's like we don't really want to talk about that stuff because then people are like, why aren't you enjoying yourself? Like you should like everything that you do and you should be grateful for everything, which can be really hard.
Yeah, and I honestly don't talk to other people about it unless they're in the business or in the industry, because I do feel guilty complaining about, oh, travel is boring now, or it just sounds really annoying. And if I was listening to myself, I'd probably want to slap myself if I said something like that. And, if the other person's like hating their 9 to 5, but that's why, yeah, I mean, like anything else, it's a job, right? And it's not always great. It's not always as it seems. And there is a lot of sacrifices that you have to go through and a lot of work in order to get to this point. And I think most people don't understand just how much work it actually takes in order to be successful in this sort of business, because it's really cutthroat and it's not easy to do. But most people just see the content that we create, the end project of it, and they don't understand everything else that you've gone through to give them that, to make it look that good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very true. And so I'm curious, do you have any final tips for anyone who's listening who might be wanting to make the leap into digital nomad life? Any tips for getting started or starting to find that first paid gig that we haven't talked about already?
Yeah, so it really depends on what your skill sets are, what your interests are. And like I said before, anything that you're doing right now, as long as you're doing it on a computer, you can translate that into any remote jobs. So you guys touched up on it. You can go to Upwork, there's Fiverr. You can definitely go to my website, the offbeatlife.com, and check out all of the blog posts that we have that really tells you what type of jobs you can get for specific skills. If you're an introvert, this is what you can get. If you want to get paid a certain amount, this is what you should do. So yeah, you can definitely go through those resources and obviously just start Googling. I mean, Google is our best friend, and you'll find it. Just be persistent, apply, keep applying some more. Even the jobs you don't feel like you can get or it's not the right one, it's just practicing your skills, practicing writing those resumes, practicing going on interviews. It's all of those things that will get you to that level.
Amazing. Thank you for those tips. And we'll make sure that there's a link to your website in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that people should go to find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are interested in listening to the podcast where I interview a bunch of digital nomads and remote entrepreneurs who are honestly so inspiring for me, and they still inspire me every day, just like Amanda and Ryan here, I have them on my podcast. You can go to theoffbeatlife.com. That's also where you're going to find all of those articles that will help you get to become remote. And if you're interested in becoming a podcaster or anything podcaster wise, you can go to howtocreateapodcast.com, where I have some resources there if you need mentorship. I also have an ebook there, How to Create a Profitable Podcast, where I share with you how to take a podcast from hobby to profitable business.
Amazing. So many great resources. We'll make sure there's links to everything. And thank you so much for this conversation today, Debbie. It's been absolutely amazing getting to flip the script and learn more about you and talk with you a little bit more.
Thank you, guys. It was a real pleasure to speak with you as well.
Thanks, Debbie. To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.